If you don't know who you should be, pick something. Pick something. Pick something that would be an accomplishment. Even do it somewhat arbitrarily, because you know, maybe you have too many choices, you don't know what you're interested in. Start somewhere, aim at something, do it. Maybe it's a 6-month certificate at something. Maybe it's an online course. Whatever. Pick something. Work hard at it. See what happens. What'll happen is, well, you'll get more disciplined as a consequence of the work, and so that'll make you a somewhat different person. But also, as you work on it, you'll figure out in more detail why it's for you or why it's not. And then when you make the next decision, you'll be more informed. That's how a self-correcting cybernetic system works, essentially. You establish an aim and you move towards it. As you move towards it, you gather information. That may shift your aim, but you have to move towards the aim.
So in essence, even if you don't accomplish what you set out to do, that the lessons along the way, that is the higher lesson at some level.
Yes, well, and you, let's say you should try to accomplish it, but I say, let's say, well, you get halfway through it and you think, I really know this isn't for me. Then you might say, well, how do you know you're not just copping out?
Yeah.
And I would say, well, you can set up a check against that by swearing when you start something that you won't switch it except for something more difficult. And then, because, you know, everybody has that tendency to rationalize their procrastination, and that's a good way of protecting yourself against that. It's like, I can quit this, but I have to have a better plan that's more difficult, and I can jump into that. And this is also associated with something like the necessary minimum of respect for tradition. If you pick a goal, it'll be a goal that's a social institution of some sort, virtually, with virtual certainty, because it has to be valuable to other people to be valuable, generally speaking. You don't want to be so cynical that you stop yourself from pursuing anything because nothing's worthwhile. That's not helpful. And everyone knows that. And you might say, well, I can't get out of that cynicism. And I would say, well, jumping out of the cynicism may be very difficult. Try just doing something local. Just pick something. You know, if you don't have a relationship, make a dating profile. You don't even have to put it online. But at least you have the profile. You're taking a step in that direction.
You don't know what's possible. And you're not as much as you could be. And so God only knows what you could do and have and give if you sacrificed everything to it. And that's the reason Abraham is constantly making sacrifices. And it's archaic, right? He's burning up like baby lambs, but like, well, they're alive, you know, that's something. And they're valuable, and that's something. You have to admit, even if you think about it as a modern person, that the act of sacrificing something might have some dramatic compulsion to it. You know, to go out into a flock and to take something that's newborn and to cut its throat and to bleed it and to burn it might be a way of indicating to yourself that you're actually serious about something. And it isn't so obvious that we have rituals of seriousness like that now. And so it's not so obvious that we're actually serious about anything. And so maybe that's not such a good thing. And so maybe we shouldn't be thinking that these people were so archaic and primitive and superstitious. It's possible that they knew something that we don't. And certainly in the Abrahamic stories, one of the things that maintains Abraham's covenant with God is his continual willingness to sacrifice. It's so that sacrificial issue is so important, because you are not committed to something unless you're willing to sacrifice for it. Commitment and sacrifice are the same thing. And I think it borders on miraculous that those concepts are embedded into this narrative at the level of dramatic action, you know, instead of abstract explanation. People are acting this out. And the fundamental conception is so profound that it's really quite awe-inspiring. It's breathtaking, really, when you understand what message is trying to be conveyed. You have to make sacrifices. And what do you have to sacrifice? You have to sacrifice that which is most valuable to you currently that's stopping you. And God only knows what that is. It's certainly the worst of you. It's certainly that. And God only knows to what degree you're in love with the worst of you. So you move from the unbearable present to the ideal future. And And you can't help that. You have to live in a structure like that. That's your house. That's another way of thinking about it. And if you want to get your house in order, and if you want it to be a place that you can live properly, then you have to plan the future that is perfect. And then I think, well, what does that mean? And it means it's good for you, right? And one of the things that I do all the time with my clinical and consulting clients is try to figure out what would be good for them. But we do more than that. We try to think, okay, well, how can we set this up so it's really good for you, and that all the side consequences of that are things that are good for other people? And so, because people are often also timid about trying to get something that's good for themselves because they feel that it's selfish or that they don't deserve it. So we set it up so that, well, look, we're going to set it up so that it's plainly obvious that this will not harm the structure of the universe. For you to have what you need and to do it in a way that's of benefit to other people. There's no downside to that. And so it's okay. It's okay if you reach out and take that. And one of the things that's interesting about the biblical stories, the Abrahamic stories as well, is that God doesn't really seem to be opposed to the success of the people that he's chosen. You know, what happens to them is as they progress through their journey is they get larger flocks, and they get more authority, and they get life more abundant. That's what happens. God doesn't seem to be a miser in the Old Testament. It's like if you put in the effort and you accept the covenant and you make the sacrifices, then you get to be successful, and maybe successful beyond your wildest dreams. And that's actually seems to be okay with God. And that's pretty cool, given that, you know, that the general notion of Old Testament God is that all he's doing is casting out curses and death, you know, wherever he happens to wander. And I mean, there's certainly no shortage of that, but again, it seems to me that that's very good news, and that you also don't have to be perfect in order to have that happen. And then the other thing, this is the issue about going into the unknown. It's like, well, if you leave your country and your kin and your father's house and you go out into a land that your intuition guides you to, you're going to undergo these radical transformations. This is a sacrificial transformation too, because you're moving forthrightly and voluntarily into chaos, right? And that's the same as the dragon fight. That's the hero's story. And what will happen there is that you will transform yourself. And so the call to an ideal is also the call to a sequence of deaths and rebirths that move you closer and closer to the ideal.
If you're resentful about something, well, first of all, you should notice, I'm resentful. And that's kind of humiliating, because no one's proud of being resentful. It's a shameful emotion. Also, then why are you resentful? Well, there's only two reasons as far as I've been able to tell. One is that you're allowing yourself to be taken advantage of, or you're being taken advantage of. Sometimes you're not allowing yourself. Sometimes you're a child being abused by their uncle. You're not allowing yourself. You can't do anything about it. You're resentful because you're being taken advantage of, or because you're immature. It's one of those two things. Figure out which it is, and then take the steps necessary to address it. Living a life without resentment is a great goal.